maybe that's the prime audience for this book is like women that are coming out of college or early on in their careers. I listen, I get it. It's hard. It's going to be hard. But I think my best advice for anybody in that space is to really own who you are. And again, if you're in a job that fits your skill set and you're in a job where you are passionate and confident, you're naturally going to have that a little bit more. But I think one of the things that it took me entirely too long to learn is that my voice mattered in those spaces too. Right. And as you can imagine, when you become CEO by 38, right, you're in a lot of rooms that a lot of people don't get access to. We work with some national clients, like really large organizations all across the country. And a lot of times those rooms tend to lack diversity of thought, whether that's by gender or by color or by socioeconomic status, doesn't matter. It lacks a little bit of diversity. And so when you get the opportunity to be in the room, don't be intimidated by the room. It took me a really long time to kind of own my voice and own the fact that like, no, I'm in the room because I deserve to be in the room. And so I can speak up. There's certainly a difference between that and being obnoxious about it, and throwing your weight around just because you're the woman in the room. So certainly, like everything else, it's a balance. But I think that's my biggest advice is to own your voice and don't be afraid of it. Because a lot more organizations, a lot more companies, businesses, nonprofits, it doesn't matter. Far too many organizations lack that diversity of thought. And so the voice of a younger female or minority audience, whatever it is, that those things matter.
I concur. I think that especially depending on what age group, of course, but any females who are trying to go after their dreams and who might feel a limitation because maybe they're one of a few engineers or I love the story of the computers, the women at NASA back during the 1940s, 50s.
I think it was in the 50s.
Okay, 50s. And I literally love that story. I actually just checked out the movie too. I love the kids' book and I love the book for adults, but I think we need more of those voices and we need to recognize, like you said, you're in the room because you earned being in the room, not because you were just placed there. And so that kind of lends itself to a confidence and self-esteem. I mean, I imagine because I've never been in corporate and never probably will be just because that's not my vibe. But I also was like a classroom teacher, tutor. Now I'm a writer and a mom. So, but I can exactly pinpoint what you're saying because I know if I were in that place, I would be filled with self-doubt and probably not owning my voice when in fact that's the very weapon or whatever tool of self-destruction is not owning your voice and believing in yourself first.
It is super easy to get intimidated in those spaces. And if you're a female in general, it's easy to get intimidated in those spaces. If you are a female under 40, it's a whole different ballgame because you're walking into this room and most of the guys in there are in their 50s and 60s and they look at you like, and I have always tended to look a little younger than I actually am. And so I would walk into rooms and they'd be like, "You're my daughter's age. What do you possibly have to say?" I'm like, "No, really, I'm an adult. I promise."
Yeah. Let
yeah,
me speak.
yeah, yeah. That's why I love some of the examples that are being set for women right now. Whether that's, we saw it in some of the Oscars last night. We're seeing it in politics. We're seeing it in companies. So there are more and more of these examples of women being like, no, like I'm here. I'm going to speak. I'm not just here to fill a quotient.
Exactly. And we need that. We need more of those women for sure in every corner. So let's go back to that fun idea of whether or not you've always wanted to be a writer. And while we're talking about that and what led you to your writing journey, what is the most challenging part of being an author in your opinion?
I think part of it for me was that self-doubt, like anything else.
Mhm.
So my book launched January 26th. And I had been talking up pre-orders on my social media channels and, doing all the things that indie authors, self-published authors are supposed to do. Um, and then one of my best friends lives down the hall in our apartment building. And I went down there literally 2 days before the book launched. And I had this like almost terrified expression on my face. And he said, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong?" And I was like, "But like, what if people read it?" And he goes, I thought that's what we were doing here. Is that not the point? Like, he's like, "Megan, the whole point is that it's a book and people are supposed to read it." I was like, "Yeah, but like, what if they think it's dumb? What if they like don't understand?" And so it goes right back to that self-doubt piece, right? Of like, what if I put it out there and somebody thinks that it's stupid or somebody doesn't like my opinion or disagrees with my assumption? Um, there's so a lot of the book, I think you've seen, is very much focused around my kind of my career journey, but there's also some chapters on relationships, kind of sprinkled in there just for, hey, I learned some lessons in those as well. um, and one of those exes actually got in contact and was like, "For the record, I remember some of this differently." And I was like, "Oh no, okay."
I didn't
um,
want you to read it. Yeah.
no. Yeah, so I think just the hardest part for me was letting go of shit is really vulnerable. It's really honest. And so yeah, and it's out in the world for anybody who wants to read it. And so that for me was a big challenge. But to the point where I never actually intended to be a writer. Uh Writing is always something that I've always been a journaler. I was a communication major in college. Like I really like, um friends of mine make fun of me because they say I just really like words. Um, I'm a huge reader, love to write for journaling, love to do, like the marketing strategy around branding and copy and messaging and all of those pieces. That's what my career is built on. And so I love that whole arena. Um, but yeah, never I'd never intended to do something this substantial. That was never the plan. But
And here you are, though.
thank
Here you
you.
are, and you did it. You've been vulnerable and courageous, and it's a huge deal. I mean, it
I
is.
think, um,
Oh, go ahead.
I think I think that's another testament to God though. Like there's nothing, if I stand right here and I look back at my career trajectory, at the opportunities that I've had in my life and the things that I've accomplished, like I at 22 graduating from college would not have ever done any, like I in my wildest dreams could not have imagined the journey that I have taken in the last 20 years. um and the book is just another chapter of that. Like I firmly believe we would do younger generations a giant service if we could get them to understand that like it's less about the 5-year plan and more about just open, like going through the doors that God opens for you. And being willing to be faithful in that. And I think that's where a lot of my journey has come from, and certainly where the book came from.
And we don't have to know every single
Yeah,
door or even what's going to happen in the next year. I mean, nobody really probably predicted COVID would happen, but like look at how much it's affected our daily
yeah,
life.
crazy.
And even with and for authors and especially indie authors. I mean, how challenging has that been for you? Have you been able to promote the book, virtual events? What have you done?
Yeah, so I've been doing some virtual, did a lot on my social media channels, but if you go research the blogs for how to market your indie book, right? Your self-published book, everything is about going to your local bookstore and getting them to pick up some copies and doing events there, have your friends and family bug local bookstores, buy them. Well, like half the bookstores aren't even open yet. Right. And so, especially back in January when it was super cold, nobody, and I'm in Pittsburgh, right? So nobody's doing indoor events and there's not really an outdoor option. Um, so that wasn't gonna be good. So Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. I think I've had some really good opportunities to do some podcast interviews and some radio and those kind of pieces. And I will say my friends and family are amazing. They have been huge helpers in sharing everything when I put it out on social media and like helping to get the message out there, which has been awesome. Yeah, so I'm part of a really great network that way.
And that's really helpful. You have to have a good network, regardless of how you're publishing. I'm doing hybrid publishing, but it's also challenging and you've got to have a good network. And so let me ask you that too. Did you consider doing traditional publishing with your book? You did. And
I
you
did.
did you kind of seek out different publishers or
Yeah.
agents?
So I looked at different options, but what I learned very quickly is that traditional publishing really likes books that fit nicely into their little genre boxes, right? And letting go of should, I think, is very representative of me in that way. Is like I don't fit in any little boxes, um,
Fair.
right? Like I'm kind of all over the place, and letting go of should doesn't either. It's a little bit leadership. It's a little bit memoir. It's a little bit faith based, self help, whatever you want to call it. And so it doesn't fit neatly. It didn't fit neatly anywhere. And also, it is a super vulnerable look at my story. And
Right.
so I didn't really feel great about signing the rights to that over to anyone. So I personally am the choice that seemed to work best for me, and I've been super pleased with it. Is that I self-published, but I distributed through Ingram Spark,
Oh,
and yeah, so I let Ingram handle all the distribution for both print and the ebook. So that has been really great. I've been super happy with the product itself and also with their help in distributing. And then thanks to a friend of mine, I'm actually recording the audiobook this summer. So we'll be putting,
oh, wow. That's really cool. That
yeah,
what
I'm
an
excited
honor.
about that.
That's neat. Do you have a friend that has a studio or the ability to okay,
Yep.
turn it into an audiobook? That's cool. I mean,
Yeah.
I write children's books, so there's really no point in doing an audiobook. You know, the
Yeah.
pictures obviously help tell the
Huge.
story too. But I think that would be so cool and a lot of work. I know that a friend of mine, her book's coming out in May, and she just finished recording the audiobook, but it was like days and hours and
Oh, yes.
wearing certain clothes so that they don't make a sound and get picked up by the mic. And when her voice got dry, like eating green apples and drinking water. So all kinds of fun tips, right? Things that you
Yeah.
would need to do, but that is really cool. Like that's a goal of mine. Very long term. I don't know when it will happen, but that's cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm excited about that part.
I bet. So this one's kind of a loaded question, but it's going to kind of bring together what the other things we've talked about, kind of just bring
Mhm.
it, to one place, and that is what are the typical expectations that you face in life as an author, as a woman, as someone in corporate? Like, what are some of those expectations? And without giving away too much from the book, how have you learned to deal with those expectations?
So I think especially in a lot of Christian or religious cultures, I think there's an expectation on women to do to get married and have kids. And even if you're going to keep working, there's that
Right.
there is that and that expectation,
The background. Yes. Yeah.
and that hasn't been my journey so far. Again, talk about like what I thought would have happened at 22. If you would have told me that I'm about to turn 41, that I'd still be single, I'd be like, oh no, that's not true, right? And so I think I felt like there were a lot of expectations um, within that, and there's a lot, I think, because you don't realize how often conversations about marriage and kids are the icebreaker in corporate settings. And when you don't necessarily have something to offer, people are like, okay, well, let's just okay, and they like they don't know what to do with it. And so I think that's one that I've had to kind of wrestle with a couple different times, and just come to terms with like, no, this is who I am. I'm still a person. Like I'm
I
still,
know, like, get to know me. That I'm
yeah.
worth getting to know just because I don't have a husband or kids. Yeah, exactly.
It's not hinged on somebody else's existence. So I think that's been an expectation that I've had to kind of work through and struggle through a couple of different times. I think in the workplace there, I've run into a couple different scenarios where the expectation is that I would just kind of give in to whatever whatever the man in the room was bringing to the table, um, which is a hard thing to wrestle through as well, and to stand that ground. And then I just think as an author, as an indie author, I think people don't actually expect much from you. This is this is what I'm starting to learn, right? As an indie author, people are like, "Oh, so you sold like what, like 10?" I'm like, "Actually, no, I just crossed the 500 mark." And they're like, "Wow, that's incredible," right? So, yeah, which is so exciting. But I think in general, people are like, "Oh, indie author, you're selling them yourself," or even on Amazon. It's like, all right, that's a cute little pet project.